Bernie Sanders, the independent U.S. Senator from Vermont, recently stated his fears that billionaires may have bought the United States government. He's also said that Americans have every right to be angry. So let's find out exactly why he thinks that. As Senator Sanders joins me from Capitol Hill, the longest-serving independent in Congress in American history, and he might be considering a White House run in 2016. You've said Americans have every right in the world to be angry about the declining middle class. Elaborate how? Why should we be angry?
This is why people should be angry, Larry. Right now, despite an explosion of technology, despite huge increase in worker productivity, most people are producing more. We have millions of Americans who are working longer hours for lower wages. If you're a man, in terms of inflation accounted for dollars, you are actually earning less than you did 42 years ago. If you're a woman, you're making less than you made 7 years ago. So how does it happen that people are producing more and yet earning less? And one of the reasons is that since the Wall Street crash, for example, 99% of all new income generated in the economy is going to the top 1%. And we're looking at a situation where the top 1/10 of 1% owns almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%. So your average person is working longer hours for low wages. Almost no new income is going to the people on top. In my view, that should make and does make the American people pretty angry.
Maybe because I live in Beverly Hills, but I don't sense the anger. Is that my fault?
No, Larry, it is not your fault. And Beverly Hills certainly may well be an exception to the rule. But I think if you go around the country, you talk to people, and I do that, and they say, you know, Bernie, it's not just me and my life that I'm worried about. I'm worried about my kids. Everything being equal, our kids will have a lower standard of living than we do. Kids can't afford to go to college or are leaving school deeply in debt. Youth unemployment in this country today is about 17%. A lot of kids are giving up even on the dream of going to college. So, Larry, among working class families who are seeing their jobs going to China, seeing their jobs going to Mexico, worried about their future and the future of their kids, there is a lot of anger and there is a lot of frustration.
If the disparity is that great, and I have no doubt that you're right, doesn't that seem incurable?
No. You know, I just came back yesterday, literally yesterday, from a trip to Alabama where we were in Selma, Alabama, honoring those incredibly brave people who were beaten, who put their lives on the line to end segregation, to push for a Voting Rights Act that enabled African Americans to participate in America's political process. Larry, if you and I were chatting 60 years ago, where people were chatting and they said, you know, someday you're going to have a situation not only where African Americans can vote in the South, but you'll have an African American president, what would you have said? You would have said, that's crazy. That's impossible to do. It happened.
Right. You got a point. All right, so that's inward, and when we look outward and we talk about security, in your opinion, Bernie, who's a greater threat to America, the Koch brothers or ISIS?
Well, it's an unusual question. I think what the Koch brothers are is a threat in a significant way, and it's not just the Koch brothers. As a result of the disastrous Supreme Court decision on Citizens United, what it said is that billionaire families like the Koch brothers could essentially buy politicians and buy elections. That is a real threat to American democracy. And I believe very strongly that we have got to move toward a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United and move toward public funding of elections. In terms of ISIS, you know, they are a threat in their own way, obviously.
If you run for president, and you haven't made up your mind yet, right?
Yes, that's right.
You've described yourself as a small d Democrat. So when you tell us Americans what a small d Democrat means?
Well, a democratic socialist, I think.
Right, democratic socialist.
What it means is that I think we have got a lot to learn from in countries like Denmark, Sweden, Finland, Norway, countries that have gone a long, long way to eliminating poverty in their nations, providing health care to all of their people regardless of income, providing higher education, child care to all of their kids regardless of income, provide strong retirement security. In other words, in those countries, by and large, their government responds to the needs of their ordinary people rather than just the very, very wealthy. And that's what I think government should be about, Larry. Consider me an old-fashioned radical or whatever you want. I have the crazy idea that maybe government should work for ordinary Americans and not just wealthy campaign contributors.
You skipped last week's speech by the Israeli Prime Minister. Why?
Well, for a couple of reasons, Larry. First, I was offended by the degree to which Speaker of the House Boehner made this a political show. When you invite a foreign minister, a prime minister, to come to the joint session of the House and the Senate, you always confer with the President of the United States. Constitutionally, the President is our leader on foreign affairs. You don't go behind his back. That's what they did, and that offended me very much. Second of all, as you know, Netanyahu is in the midst of a very difficult political campaign in Israel. Whether he wins or loses, I don't know. But you should not allow Congress to be used as a photo op for somebody who is in the midst of a campaign. That's kind of unprecedented. I think it's a bad idea. Those were the two main reasons that kept me from going.
He criticized an agreement with Iran, as others are doing, but no one knows what the agreement's going to say or if there will be an agreement. How can you criticize something before the fact?
Well, that's a very good point, Larry, and I agree with you. But I'll tell you what really bothers me, and we're seeing more and more of this stuff. You know, I oppose the war in Iraq, and I think that that war will go down in history as one of the worst foreign policy mistakes in American history. And what it did is not only lead to a large loss of life for Americans and people in Iraq, but it also caused massive destabilization in that region, which led, among other things, to the rise of al-Qaeda and ISIS. And we're having to try to pick up the pieces right now. I would think that for most people, a war in Afghanistan, which went on a lot longer than anyone anticipated, a war in Iraq that went on for over 10 years, is still going on, might be enough war for the United States. But apparently there are some of my Republican colleagues who aren't satisfied with just 2 wars in the region. They seem to want a 3rd war. Look, the president is trying, along with 5 other countries, trying to negotiate a very difficult agreement with Iran. Will he succeed? I don't know. He doesn't know. He is making the effort to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon without going to war. I think that is an effort worth pursuing, an effort worth supporting, and we will see what happens.
Bernie, logically, you know, as an independent senator, and there have been great independents before you, and you're the longest ever to serve, but there have been Wayne Morse and others, you know that a run for the presidency would be a real long shot. When did you even consider it?
Well, I have not made up my mind, A, whether I'm going to run, B, whether if I do run, I would run as an independent or within the Democratic structure. I am an independent. Since I've been in Congress, I caucus with the Democrats. There are obviously advantages and disadvantages of running as an independent or within the Democratic caucus. But the role I will not play, Larry, is that of a spoiler. I will not help some right-wing Republican get elected. That I will not do.
All right. With this campaign in 2016, do you think it's going to be a campaign dealing with security and foreign policy or more on domestic economy?
Well, I think, you know, it will certainly deal with both. But I think right now, with the middle class of this country in a 40-year decline, at a time when we have almost more people living in poverty than any time in the modern history of this country, when the gap between the very, very rich and everybody else is growing wider and wider, it seems to me that domestic issues of how we create jobs, how we raise incomes, how we have trade policies that work for the middle class and not just for multinational corporations, how we join the rest of the industrialized world in providing health care to all people, how we make higher education affordable so our kids do not graduate deeply in debt, how we rebuild our crumbling infrastructure and create millions of jobs doing that, how we deal with climate change. I think those issues have got to be discussed. Needless to say, ISIS and foreign policy are always important issues. They will be part of the discussion as well.
Could we say, though, that in the last 24 years, 16 of those years, we've had an American Democratic president? How much of it is the fault of that party?
I wouldn't, well, it is a bipartisan fault, Larry, and I think, you know, going back, you know, it's a sad fact of life, sad thing to have to say, but for the American worker, the highest point of his or her economic situation was in the mid-1970s. People were earning better wages and better benefits. You know, back then, you had many public universities that were virtually free. Workers had strong benefits in health care, retirement benefits, and a lot of that has dissipated. So I think our goal, I think you could hold both parties responsible, but I think the major source of responsibility goes back to Ronald Reagan and the introduction of this laissez-faire, supply-side, casino-style capitalism and deregulation and anti-trade unionism. So again, you can blame both parties for a lot. I would put more of the blame on some of the right-wing Republican policies.
Before we talk about this digital question, Bernie, and privacy, you've said in interviews that you don't want to discuss your views about Hillary Clinton. I can't believe this. Why doesn't
Really?
Bernie Sanders want to discuss something?
Now, what I mean by that,
Not you,
Larry,
Bernie.
yeah. You know, what I mean by that, Larry, if I run, I'm going to be running on the major issues facing working families. What media likes to do is create conflict. They want me to attack Hillary Clinton. That's not what I'm interested in doing. I have a lot of respect for Hillary Clinton. I suspect we're going to have strong disagreements on a number of issues. If she runs, if I run, we'll have that debate. That's what the American people are entitled to. But I just don't like taking
All right, but
pot shots at
you
people.
can have an opinion on private emails as Secretary of State. What are your thoughts in that one area?
Well, I just don't know enough about that, Larry. And it's, you know, I got to tell you, I've gotten zero. Last that I heard, I've gotten 0 calls from Vermont on that issue. I don't know what the rules are in the Senate on it, so I really don't have anything profound to say.
Okay, what do you make of the controversy? We'll be discussing it a little bit with our next guest as well. This question of privacy in the digital age. How much does it concern you?
It concerns me a whole lot, Larry, and this is an issue that is not discussed enough, certainly in Congress, and I think in the media. And you're talking to somebody, by the way, who voted against the original USA Patriot Act when that was not an easy vote, not the most popular vote in the world, and voted against the reauthorization of the Patriot Act for many of the reasons I think you are concerned about, and that is what it does to the privacy rights of Americans. Here's where we're at. Technologically, what we have seen is the digital age has gone far further and faster than legislation has gone in order to protect American privacy. It is the government, but it is not just the government. It is the private sector as well. Larry, I think the average person who goes to the internet, the average person who makes a telephone call, should have every reason to believe that the NSA, government agency, knows who you called on the phone, where you made that phone call, and that's on record at the NSA. I don't believe they're listening to the phone calls, but whom you called and when is on record. You have a right to believe that it is possible that somebody knows what websites you are visiting, the emails that you are sending out. You have a right to believe, an expectation that somebody knows the magazines that you are reading, where you are shopping, where you are. There has been a huge attack. 50 years ago, I think nobody would have believed the kind of technological assault that has taken place on people's right to live their own life without the whole world knowing what they are doing. That's a fact, and it is a scary fact, and that it's government and the private sector, and we need some legislation to say, you know what, as an American, not the whole world doesn't have to know about everything that you do.
Well said. Senator, does it puzzle you why ISIS has been able to recruit young people from all over the world?
It doesn't puzzle me. Look, you got a lot of disenchanted, angry young people whose lives are going nowhere in a hurry. And the romantic idea of being able to get into a war and, get indoctrinated about this extremist, crazy stuff, I can understand how young people can fall for it. I think it's really sad. I think it's tragic. But no, nothing much in this world today really surprises me.
And they use social media.
And they use social media, yeah.
Which concerns you, I would imagine, a great deal.
It does. It does.
Senators,
but again, go ahead. I'm sorry, Larry.
I was going to thank you very much for being with us. I wish you the best in all you do. I think you're a great American. People may disagree with you, but you have always stood forth with your comments and thoughts. I really appreciate you being with us.
Well, thank you very much, Larry.